Harmony Glades and the skateboarder. The whirring of polyurethane wheels against the pavement formed Billy Thompson's offbeat concerto. He leaned into the curve when playfully musing his shaggy brown hair, a wide grin stretched across his face. Harmony Glades wasn't exactly a haven for thrill seekers, but Billy manufactured his own on 4 wheels. The pristine, almost unnaturally smooth sidewalks were ideal for cruising, and the gentle grade descending from Oak Street offered just the right amount of momentum. He popped an ollie over a hairline fracture in the concrete, a slight wobble corrected with an automatic adjustment. This was liberation. A reprieve from geometry homework, from weekend chores, and from the palpable tension that had become a permanent fixture at the dinner table since his parents' hushed conferences began. Little did Billy know, a pair of hawkish eyes observed him from behind the starched lace curtains of number 14. Agnes Crabtree's lips were permanently etched in a downward curve. The mere sight of Billy Thompson with his eternally scuffed sneakers and that contraption, polluting the air with its grating buzz, threatened to detonate her carefully maintained composure. Harmony Glades. The very name whispered promises of peace, order, and impeccability. And for the most part it delivered. Emerald lawns, precisely sculpted shrubbery, houses swathed in HOA-approved shades of taupe and ecru. The Homeowners Association ensured unwavering conformity. Rules were sacrosanct. Regulations reigned supreme. And noise, well, noise was anathema. Mrs. Crabtree gripped her delicate teacup a little tighter, the painted roses pressing into her skin. For 2 decades she'd meticulously cultivated this image of suburban Eden, and this youthful menace was poised to shatter it all with his heedless abandon. The HOA guidelines explicitly forbade skateboarding on sidewalks designated solely for pedestrian traffic. Oblivious to the rising ire he inspired, Billy executed a sweeping arc at the corner and began his ascent. He was determined to nail the kickflip that had eluded him all week. Positioning his feet, he inhaled deeply and launched the board. It rotated, but his trailing foot missed the mark, sending the deck clattering across the paving stones and Billy sprawling into the meticulously manicured flowerbed bordering Mrs. Crabtree's property. He scrambled upright, cheeks burning, and rushed to retrieve his errant skateboard. "Sorry," he called out, addressing the window more than any potential occupant. He fervently hoped no one had witnessed his clumsy dismount. Especially not. The front door of number 14 creaked open with theatrical emphasis. Mrs. Crabtree stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, her face a stony mask of barely contained fury. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it, young man," she declared, her voice a honed blade. "Do you have any conception of the damage you've inflicted upon my petunias? These are blue-ribbon petunias. And the cacophony. The infernal din. This is a peaceful neighborhood. We have standards." Billy swallowed hard, his throat suddenly constricted. Mrs. Crabtree was an intimidating figure. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in an unforgiving bun, her gaze was like chips of granite, and her voice could curdle cream. He knew, intellectually, that he was in violation of the community code, but the allure of the open expanse was too powerful to resist, even if that expanse was merely a sidewalk in Harmony Glades. "I apologized," he mumbled, avoiding her piercing stare. He bent to brush away the clinging dirt, noticing several ravaged petals adhering to his denim. The cloying scent of crushed blossoms hung heavy in the air. "An apology is insufficient." Mrs. Crabtree's voice amplified another notch. "This is precisely the sort of conduct we strive to eradicate in Harmony Glades. It's disruptive. It's inconsiderate. And it contravenes the established regulations. I am compelled to report this infraction to the HOA." Billy's spirits plummeted. An HOA citation was the last thing he needed. His parents were already navigating choppy waters. "Please, Mrs. Crabtree," he implored, his voice laced with desperation. "It was unintentional. I won't do it again. I promise." He knew the likelihood of fulfilling that promise was slim, but he was desperate to appease her. Mrs. Crabtree's rigid expression softened microscopically, a momentary lapse. "That's what they all assure me," she sighed, a trace of resignation entering her tone. "Very well, young man. I will overlook this incident. However, should I ever observe you on that device again, I will not hesitate to contact the authorities." Billy snatched up his board and retreated, his face radiating embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the pavement. As he turned to leave, he spotted his bicycle abandoned in the center of the road, directly in front of Mrs. Crabtree's residence. He groaned inwardly. Of course. He dashed to retrieve it, praying she wouldn't notice this further transgression. But Mrs. Crabtree's vigilant gaze missed nothing. She followed his every movement, her lips twitching with a strange blend of irritation and something approaching, empathy flickering in her eyes. The afternoon sun reflected off the gleaming silver numerals affixed to her immaculate front door. 14. Harmony Glades. A place for meticulous order and unwavering adherence to the norm. Except, perhaps, when it came to Billy Thompson and his skateboard. The wayward skateboard. The asphalt shimmered under the afternoon sun as Billy Thompson practiced an ollie behind his house. He landed it, finally, a clean pop and a smooth ride, pumping his fist in triumph. He tried again, pushing off, feeling the familiar grip tape against his sneakers, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. This time, though, he lost his balance. The skateboard, suddenly untethered, veered sharply to the left, escaping the cracked driveway and heading straight for the manicured perfection of Mrs. Crabtree's lawn. Billy cursed under his breath, hopping off his board and sprinting after it. Too late. The wayward skateboard, with a sickening crunch, plowed into Mrs. Crabtree's prize-winning petunias, scattering purple petals like confetti. He froze, the vibrant flowers momentarily obscuring the sight of his board. Mrs. Crabtree's front door slammed open. Agnes Crabtree, a woman whose floral print dresses were as meticulously arranged as her garden, stood on her porch, her face a mask of fury. Her gray hair, usually sculpted into a perfect helmet, seemed to bristle with indignation. "Billy Thompson," she screeched, her voice cutting through the summer air. "What in the name of Harmony Glades do you think you're doing?" Billy winced. Harmony Glades. The very name dripped with the saccharine sweetness Mrs. Crabtree seemed determined to enforce. He shuffled his feet, already formulating an apology. "Mrs. Crabtree, I'm really sorry. It was an accident. I lost my balance and the board just went that way." He gestured weakly towards the carnage. "Accident? Accident," she repeated, her voice rising another octave. "That's what they all say. This isn't the first time, young man. Do you have any idea how much time and effort I put into my garden? These are prize-winning petunias." Prize-winning. Billy edged closer, his eyes fixed on the flattened flowers. He could see the tire tracks of his board imprinted in the soft soil. He knew he was in trouble, big trouble. Mrs. Crabtree was the self-appointed guardian of Harmony Glades' aesthetic integrity, and he had just committed a cardinal sin. "I really am sorry," he repeated, hoping sincerity would soften the blow. "I'll pay for them. I'll replace them. I'll even help you replant them." Mrs. Crabtree narrowed her eyes, her gaze as sharp as the shears she used to trim her hedges. "You think money can fix everything, young man? It's not just the flowers, it's the principle. This is a respectable neighborhood. We have standards. Do you think I want to look out my window and see some hooligan tearing up my lawn with his contraption?" She pointed a trembling finger at the skateboard. Billy swallowed, his initial apology giving way to a simmering resentment. He knew he messed up, but her overreaction felt disproportionate. He walked onto the lawn, carefully stepping around the remaining flowers, and reached for his board. As he bent down, his fingers brushing against the smooth wood, he noticed something. A single, perfect daisy, inexplicably untouched by the skateboard's rampage, stood defiantly amidst the destruction. It seemed to mock the surrounding chaos, a tiny beacon of resilience. He gently brushed a stray petal off its face. Mrs. Crabtree, surprisingly, seemed to soften, just a fraction. For a moment, her face lost its angry rigidity. He saw a flicker of something else, something almost sadness, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Just get that thing off my lawn," she muttered, turning away. "And keep it off. Next time, I'm calling the police." Billy picked up his skateboard, the wheels spinning silently. "I said I was sorry, Mrs. Crabtree," he said, his voice low. He carefully backed away, feeling the weight of the board in his hands, heavier now with guilt and simmering anger. As he walked back to his driveway, he glanced back. Mrs. Crabtree was already kneeling in the flower bed, meticulously trying to revive the crushed petunias. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The red car and the blue bike. Gravel sprayed behind Billy's sneakers as he bolted, a metallic tang of anxiety coating his tongue. Mrs. Crabtree's petunias. Crushed. He hadn't meant to, couldn't deny the image seared into his memory, vibrant purple now pulped beneath his wheels, a silent accusation. Freedom. He needed the smooth glide of his board, the wind's playful whip at his hair. He'd find solace, however brief, on four wheels. It likely still lay discarded near the tangled rose brambles, abandoned in his panic. He stumbled to the sidewalk, lungs burning. His cobalt bike, Blur, leaned precariously on the verge. He hauled it upright, intending to use the mailbox as support, only to find Mrs. Henderson's peonies in full, extravagant bloom, engulfing it. He wedged Blur against the floral mess anyway, handlebars nudging into the street's edge. Not perfect, but speed mattered more. Vaulting the curb, his gaze snagged on the rose bushes. There it was, his board, prone, one wheel pirouetting in the sunlight. He seized it, the gritty surface of the deck reassuring beneath his palm. A deep thrum vibrated in the air, resonating in his chest. Not an animal this time, an engine's growl. Billy looked up. Mrs. Crabtree's crimson sedan, polished to a mirror sheen, crawled down the lane. His blood turned to ice. She was headed straight for Blur. The shout died in his throat, a strangled hiccup. The flattened petunias bloomed again in his mind's eye. A rebellious impulse flickered. Let her contend with it. Let her navigate the minor inconvenience for once. The sedan idled, the driver's window whispering open. Mrs. Crabtree's face, a cameo framed by rigid curls of silver, radiated controlled displeasure. Her mouth formed a severe line. "William Thompson," she declared, each syllable precise and cutting. "Is that your bicycle impeding traffic?" Billy's gaze dropped to the worn graphic on his deck. A mumbled response escaped him. "Speak up, young man." The command, though even, carried the bite of well-honed shears. He scuffed his shoes against the pavement. "Yeah," he conceded, barely audible. Mrs. Crabtree's nostrils flared slightly. "And do you believe it is acceptable to leave it there, obstructing access for your neighbors?" He risked a glance. Her eyes, magnified behind lenses, speared him. He felt the palpable disapproval. "I was just grabbing my board," he offered weakly, gesturing vaguely toward the roses. Her lips tightened further. For a long moment her gaze remained fixed and something shifted within it. Not pure anger, not exactly. Something else. Regret, perhaps? Or even, could it be, a ghost of understanding? But the moment dissolved. She sighed, the sound a punctured balloon. "Honestly, William," she began, the sharp edge returning, "sometimes I truly despair for the future of the street." The car clicked into park with a definitive snap. "Move it," she instructed, her tone brooking no argument. Relieved to escape a lengthy scolding, Billy scrambled to retrieve the bike. As he wrestled Blur clear of the peony tendrils, he glimpsed Mrs. Crabtree, brow creased, massaging her temples. The conviction lingered behind the anger and the chastisement. Something else stirred. A sensation that he suspected felt suspiciously like regret. 9-1. "Whoa. Thompson. Move that contraption. Now." Mrs. Crabtree's voice, a jagged shard of glass, ripped through the tranquil afternoon. Billy winced, his posture deflating like a punctured balloon. The offending bicycle, propped haphazardly against the curb, seemed to mock her immaculate lawn. Guilt, an unwelcome shadow, darkened his mood. Yesterday's floral massacre was still fresh in his mind. Relocating the two-wheeled menace was the least he could offer. "Coming, Mrs. Crabtree," he replied, the forced cordiality catching in his throat. He was halfway to a skateboarding rendezvous, the board nestled securely under his arm, dreaming of a swift escape. No such luck. "Now, brooks no delay, young man. Do you fathom how long I've suffered this intrusion?" Her voice, amplified by the gaping maw of her pristine beige house, resonated with an impending storm. He sighed, releasing a gust of pent-up frustration. "Just grabbing my board, then I'll shift it." He indicated the garage, hoping for a flicker of understanding. Her face, a study in rigid silver perfection, remained implacable. "Skateboard? What relevance does that hold? You've deposited that thing, on my property." She puffed up, a ruffled bluebird ready to defend its nest. "Obstructing my view. A blight on the landscape. A veritable menace." Billy's eyes rolled skyward, though he suspected she possessed the hawk-like vision to detect even that subtle rebellion. "It's been there, like 5 minutes. I swear I'll move it. Just a couple of ticks on the clock." He edged towards the garage, the skateboard wheels whispering promises of freedom. 2 seconds mushroom into 5, then 10, an eternity. That's the insidious pattern. This neighborhood cherishes standards, young man, standards. And you, with your defiant spirit, you perpetually test the limits. Mrs. Crabtree's voice climbed the register, reaching a shrill crescendo. Billy imagined the pulsating veins on her neck. Defeated, he halted. Argument was futile, a pathway to protracted agony and another sermon on civic virtue. He loathed this charade, the oppressive guilt, the weight of societal collapse resting on his shoulders, and above all, Mrs. Crabtree's theatrical pronouncements. "Fine," he grumbled, pivoting back to the bike. The distant thrum of Mr. Henderson's lawnmower mixed with the evening chorus of crickets, a soundtrack to his suburban plight. But then another sound cut through the noise, a dial tone followed by the unmistakable cadence of a telephone conversation. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice, official and unwavering, emanated from Mrs. Crabtree's residence, clear as a struck bell. Billy froze, his head whipping around, incredulity plastered across his features. 911? Over a bike? He strained to decipher Mrs. Crabtree's reply. Yes, I wish to lodge a complaint regarding a suspicious conveyance parked outside my abode at 14 Willow Creek Lane, she stated, her voice now coated with grave concern. Azure bicycle leaning precariously against the curb. It has remained there for a considerable duration and the owner is exhibiting peculiar conduct. Peculiar? Billy's jaw tightened. Peculiar? He was merely standing there. My suspicion is that it may be implicated in some form of illicit dealings, Mrs. Crabtree continued, her tone dripping with manufactured urgency. I hesitate to leap to conclusions, however, one can never exercise excessive caution in these times, can one? Billy stared, dumbfounded, at the beige facade. Illicit dealings? Was this real? A slow, simmering rage began to bubble within him. This surpassed ridiculousness, it was sheer lunacy. He began striding towards Mrs. Crabtree's property, his skateboard already forgotten. He had to intercept this. He had to illustrate the absurdity of her actions. As he reached the edge of her pristine lawn, he caught the tail end of Mrs. Crabtree's performance. The matter concerns public safety, officer. Please dispatch assistance with utmost haste. The line went dead. Billy stood there, speechless, his fists clenched tight. He couldn't fathom the reality of the situation. Mrs. Crabtree had actually summoned emergency services because of his bike. The police car, a black and white behemoth, barreled down the street, its siren a banshee wail that bounced off the meticulously manicured lawns. His heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't run. He wouldn't run. But every instinct screamed at him to disappear, to melt into the perfectly symmetrical shrubbery. He gripped the broken skateboard tighter, the splintered wood digging into his palm. The car screeched to a halt, kicking up a swirl of dust on the pristine asphalt. Officer Miller, a man whose face always looked perpetually unimpressed, even when he was handing out candy at Halloween, unfolded himself from the vehicle. He adjusted his belt, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the ravaged petunias, the scattered dirt, and Billy standing defiantly amidst the floral carnage. What's going on here, Thompson? Miller's voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. Billy swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. I was skateboarding, he stammered, gesturing weakly with the broken board. I lost control. I didn't mean to, Officer Miller, I swear. From her porch, Mrs. Crabtree watched, a silent sentinel of Harmony Glade's rigid order. Her arms were crossed, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Even from a distance, Billy could feel the weight of her disapproval, sharp and unforgiving. Skateboarding, Miller repeated, his eyebrows arching slightly. In Harmony Glades. On Mrs. Crabtree's prize-winning petunias. He shook his head slowly. This isn't exactly a skateboarding-friendly zone, Billy. Billy felt a flush creep up his neck. I know, sir. I wasn't thinking. It was stupid. He kicked at a loose pebble with the toe of his shoe. Gil nodded him, a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew he was in the wrong, but a flicker of resentment simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the flowers, it was about everything. The rules, the judgment, the suffocating perfection of Harmony Glades. Mrs. Crabtree seems rather upset, Miller observed, his gaze shifting towards the porch. She is, Billy admitted. He knew he should apologize, grovel even, but the words wouldn't come. He felt trapped, like a bug pinned beneath a microscope. Well, Thompson, Miller sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. You know the drill. Damage to property. Disturbing the peace. I could take you in. Billy's stomach lurched. The thought of his dad finding out, the lecture, the disappointment, it was almost worse than jail. Can't we just settle this? He pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. I'll pay for the flowers. I'll do yard work. Anything. Miller considered him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Mrs. Crabtree. Mrs. Crabtree, he called out, his voice surprisingly gentle. What do you think? Is there a way we can resolve this without getting the courts involved? Mrs. Crabtree remained on her porch, a statue carved from granite. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Billy held his breath, waiting for her verdict. Finally, she unfolded her arms and descended the steps, her floral dress swaying gently with each movement. As she approached, Billy could see the lines etched around her eyes, the years of maintaining Harmony Glade's pristine facade. But he also saw something else, a flicker of something softer, something almost sympathetic. He knows he did wrong, Officer Miller, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. And those petunias, well, they were past their prime anyway. Billy stared at her, dumbfounded. Had he heard her correctly? I think, Mrs. Crabtree continued, her gaze locking onto Billy's, that a little hard work would be a more appropriate punishment than involving the authorities. He can replant the flower bed. And maybe help me with the weeding for a few weeks. Miller raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement playing around his lips. Is that acceptable, Thompson? Billy nodded quickly, relief flooding through him. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Crabtree. I won't let you down. He meant it. He would do whatever it took to make amends, to escape the shadow of his mistake. Mrs. Crabtree nodded curtly. See that you don't, she said, her voice regaining its familiar sharpness. And no more skateboarding in Harmony Glades, young man. Officer Miller clapped Billy on the shoulder, a gesture that felt surprisingly heavy. Learn from this, Thompson, he said, his voice low. And try to stay out of trouble. For your sake and mine. He turned and headed back to his car, the sirens silent now, the quiet of Harmony Glades slowly returning. But the air felt like father, like son. Crimson and cerulean light fractured across the manicured lawns of Harmony Glades, a frantic, pulsing kaleidoscope. Billy cowered, the torn denim at his knee ached, each throb an echo of his misdeed. He hadn't sought to obliterate Mrs. Crabtree's prized petunias. Fury had simply boiled over. Ire at his father, disgust for Harmony Glades, resentment toward the suffocating facade of flawless living. A young officer, ponytail taut and eyes weary, knelt beside him. The crunch of gravel underscored the sudden hush. Everything all right, son? Billy mumbled a response, eyes fixed on the ground. The sharp fragrance of cut grass mingled with a synthetic tang. He worried a fraying thread. You're Billy, right? The officer's tone held unexpected kindness. He glanced up, surprised. Yeah. Her gaze softened, a spark of recognition igniting within. Chief Thompson's boy, aren't you? Dread coiled in Billy's gut. Of all the cops, it had to be someone who knew Dad. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat. Yes, ma'am. The words tasted bitter. Mrs. Crabtree, arms crossed and face a stony mask of indignation visibly deflated. The rigid set of her mouth relaxed and she edged backward as if wishing to vanish. The officer rose, her gaze sweeping between Billy and his accuser. What's going on here? Billy steeled himself. He'd earned this. The reprimand, the disappointment, the inevitable confinement. Every bit of it. But before he could speak, Mrs. Crabtree rushed forward, her voice rising in a reedy tremor. Oh, Officer Miller, it's nothing, truly. Just a misunderstanding. A youthful escapade, if you will. She wrung her hands, perfectly polished nails catching the flashing lights. The patrol car thrummed, a low, electric hum. He was just practicing some skateboarding, she continued, her words tumbling over each other in nervous haste. And, well, he accidentally grazed a few of my flowers. No real damage done, I'm sure I was being oversensitive. Billy gaped. Was this the same woman who had been shrieking about vandalism and branding him a menace only moments before? He could still feel the sting of her accusations, the weight of her judgment. Officer Miller arched a brow, skepticism etched on her face. A few flowers? She indicated the flattened blooms, their vibrant hues smeared against the pristine concrete. Looks like more than a graze, ma'am. A flush crept up Mrs. Crabtree's neck, mottling her complexion. Well, yes, perhaps more than a graze. But you know how it is, officer. We all get a little protective of our gardens here in Harmony Glades. It's just civic pride. The fabrication hung in the air, thick and saccharine like the smell of chemical fertilizer. Billy could taste it, a sharp, metallic tang. He longed to cry out to expose the lie, but the words felt lodged in his chest. He met Officer Miller's gaze, searching for a sign of understanding. Her expression remained an inscrutable mask. Mrs. Crabtree, emboldened by the officer's silence, persisted. I'm sure Billy understands the importance of respecting private property. Isn't that right, Billy? Her tone was a saccharine threat. Billy's fists clenched, knuckles bone white. He yearned to shout, to flee, to disappear. But he was trapped, caught between his guilt and Mrs. Crabtree's clumsy attempt to salvage her image. He choked out, yes, ma'am. He loathed the sound of it, the forced subservience, the capitulation. He loathed the feeling of being manipulated, of being reduced to a mere piece in Mrs. Crabtree's charade. But above all, he hated being Chief Thompson's son, knowing his actions reflected on his father, that his mistakes were magnified by the weight of his name. The chief arrives. The wail of the siren sliced through the afternoon calm like a rusty blade. Billy flinched, the image of crushed petunias flashing in his mind. Mrs. Crabtree, still clutching her chest and dramatically gasping for air, managed a weak, triumphant smile. A police cruiser, black and white paint gleaming under the harsh sun, screeched to a halt in front of Mrs. Crabtree's meticulously manicured lawn. The engine cut off, leaving a ringing silence that amplified Billy's guilt. His dad, Chief Thompson, unfolded himself from the driver's seat, his face a mask of professional concern. He surveyed the scene, Mrs. Crabtree feigning distress, Billy standing awkwardly with his skateboard and the flattened remains of her prize-winning flowers. He knelt beside Mrs. Crabtree, his voice calm and reassuring. "Agnes, what seems to be the trouble?" Mrs. Crabtree launched into a theatrical recounting of the events, embellishing every detail. Billy rolled his eyes. He knew the truth would sound bad enough without the extra drama. Chief Thompson, after listening patiently, rose to his full height, his gaze shifting to Billy. The professional mask slipped slightly, replaced by a flicker of paternal disappointment. "Son, a word." He gestured towards the cruiser. Billy trailed after him, the wheels of his skateboard rattling nervously against the asphalt. He leaned against the cool metal of the car, avoiding his father's eyes. "All right, Billy," Chief Thompson said, his voice low. "Tell me what happened. And I want the truth." Billy recounted the story, the words tumbling out in a rush of remorse and resentment. He admitted to skating on the sidewalk, to accidentally clipping the flower bed, and to arguing with Mrs. Crabtree. He left out the part about intentionally blocking her car, but the shame burned in his cheeks regardless. His dad listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Billy finished, he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Those flowers, Billy. They were her pride and joy." "I know, Dad," Billy mumbled, kicking at a loose pebble. "I feel terrible. I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Chief Thompson straightened, his shoulders squared. "An accident that could have been avoided with a little more consideration. You know the rules, son. This isn't a skate park." He paused, then softened his tone. "Look, I need to handle this. You go home. I'll deal with this and we'll talk later." Billy nodded, relieved to escape the immediate consequences. He pushed off on his skateboard, the wheels singing a mournful tune against the pavement. As he glanced back, he saw his dad approaching Mrs. Crabtree. Chief Thompson stood before Mrs. Crabtree, his presence commanding. "Agnes," he said, his voice firm. "I understand you called 911 due to this incident." Mrs. Crabtree, emboldened by his attention, sniffed dramatically. "Chief, I was in genuine distress. That boy terrorized me, destroyed my property, and caused me considerable emotional anguish." Chief Thompson's gaze hardened. "Agnes, I've reviewed the situation. While I understand you're upset about your flowers, calling emergency services for a minor property damage incident is a misuse of resources. Our paramedics and officers could have been needed for a genuine emergency." A flush crept up Mrs. Crabtree's neck. "But Chief, the principle of the thing. This boy's behavior is unacceptable. What kind of example does this set for the neighborhood?" "The example we should all be setting, Agnes." Chief Thompson walked back to his cruiser, the weight of his badge and his son's actions heavy on his shoulders. He glanced at the retreating figure of Billy on his skateboard, a mixture of frustration and paternal concern swirling within him. The siren remained silent, a symbol of the peace, however fragile, he was sworn to protect. Whispers in the neighborhood. The air hung thick and heavy, buzzing with the drone of cicadas and the low hum of gossip. Across the manicured lawns of Harmony Glades, neighbors emerged, drawn by an invisible thread of shared outrage and morbid curiosity. They clustered in small groups, their voices hushed, their eyes darting between the trampled remains of Mrs. Crabtree's prized petunias and the figure of Billy Thompson standing rigid beside his father. Mrs. Higgins, perpetually draped in floral prints, wrung her hands. Mr. Abernathy, known for his meticulously trimmed hedges, shook his head, muttering about the decline of decency. Even young Lily Peterson, usually bright and bubbly, watched with wide, somber eyes, clutching her doll tightly. Billy felt their gazes like pinpricks. Shame burned in his chest, a bitter concoction mixed with resentment. He hadn't meant to destroy the flowers, hadn't even realized he was so close to the edge of the Crabtree's meticulously defined property line. It had been a stupid, impulsive moment, fueled by frustration and the relentless need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of Harmony Glades. Mrs. Crabtree, face flushed and blotchy, stood on her porch, surveying the scene with a tight, unhappy expression. She clutched a watering can, its brassy gleam reflecting the harsh afternoon sun. It was an odd sight, like she'd been in the middle of tending to her flowers when she saw the destruction and just stood there, frozen, holding the watering can. "Well, Billy," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I suppose accidents happen." The words felt forced, each syllable a tiny barb. "But you must be more careful. These were Irreplaceable. She glanced at the whispering neighbors, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. I just want things to go back to normal. Billy mumbled an apology, the words sticking in his throat. He wanted to explain, to make her understand that it wasn't malicious, but the weight of her disappointment and the collective judgment of the neighborhood pressed down on him. He just wanted to disappear. Chief Thompson stepped forward, his presence radiating authority. He placed a hand on Billy's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Agnes, I appreciate your understanding. Billy regrets what happened. We'll take care of the damages. He turned to address the assembled neighbors, his voice calm and measured. Folks, I understand your concern. We're a community, and it's important to resolve conflicts peacefully. I suggest Mrs. Crabtree and Billy have a conversation, maybe find a way to make amends that works for everyone. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Harmony Glades is known for its tranquility. Let's not let this incident disrupt that. But he added, his voice hardening slightly, let me be clear. Disruptions of the peace, damage to property. These things have consequences. We can handle this amongst ourselves, neighbor to neighbor, or we can handle it by the book. The choice is yours. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The neighbors shifted uneasily, their whispers dying down. Mrs. Crabtree's gaze softened ever so slightly as she looked at Billy, almost a hint of pity flickering in her eyes before she turned and retreated into her house, the screen door slamming shut behind her. The watering can clattered to the porch. Chief Thompson squeezed Billy's shoulder. Let's go home, son. As they walked away, Billy could still feel the weight of the neighborhood's gaze, the whispers chasing after them like restless spirits. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He still felt guilty and even more resentful. Making amends wouldn't be enough, not for Mrs. Crabtree, not for Harmony Glades, and definitely not for the growing storm inside him. Harmony restored. The squeak of Mrs. Abernathy's practical shoes cut through the still air of the community hall. Sunlight, a single, dusty spear, pierced the lowered blinds. Around the gleaming mahogany table sat the Harmony Glades HOA triumvirate, Mr. Henderson, his expression somber, Mrs. Abernathy, her lips a bloodless line, and young Mr. Davies. His anxiety manifested in the frantic clicking of his pen. The weight of unspoken conflict pressed down, a heavy counterpoint to the idyllic facade of manicured lawns outside. All right, Mr. Henderson began, his voice a gravelly rasp. We addressed the motion concerning Mrs. Crabtree's standing on the board in light of recent events. Mrs. Abernathy's throat cleared, a dry, rustling sound. Agnes has always been steadfast in her dedication to our community standards. Barely 30, Mr. Davies swallowed hard. But the petition, the sheer volume of signatures. Popularity isn't always synonymous with the greater good, Mrs. Abernathy retorted, her tone gaining an edge. True, Mr. Henderson conceded, but disregarding the collective will isn't very democratic, is it? We'll vote then. All those in favor of a review of Mrs. Crabtree's position say aye. The ayes of Mr. Henderson and Mr. Davies echoed faintly. Mrs. Abernathy paused, then, with a defeated sigh, offered a reluctant agreement. Motion carried, Mr. Henderson declared, the words lingering like a judgment. Mrs. Crabtree will be informed. Meanwhile, a contrasting energy thrummed through Harmony Glades. The sinking sun painted long shadows as Billy Thompson, his spirit buoyed after weeks of gloom, propelled himself forward on his skateboard. Euphoria surged as the wheels sang against the pavement. No more lurking in the shadows. No more bowing his head in shame. Today he rode tall. He landed an ollie with a satisfying thud, and a ripple of applause arose from the cluster of neighbors watching from their verdant lawns. Mr. Garcia signaled his approval with a thumbs up. Even Mrs. Peterson, famed for her pristine roses, offered a fleeting smile. It was as though the entire community were behind him, a silent act of defiance against the suffocating rigidity of the HOA. Billy weaved down the street, the wind a joyous caress in his hair, the neighbors' encouragement his anthem. This wasn't just skateboarding. It was a proclamation. It was a message to Mrs. Crabtree and to the entire HOA that Harmony Glades was more than perfect lawns and regulation mailboxes. It was about belonging, about compassion, about a touch of humanity. Inside her immaculate living room, Agnes Crabtree sat isolated, the floral drapes drawn tight against the world. Silence roared in her ears. The grandfather clock's relentless tick in the hall felt like mockery. Her gaze fell upon the wilting petunias on the windowsill, their once vibrant purple now faded and dull. She couldn't bring herself to discard them. Billy's face flashed in her memory, a portrait of wounded defiance. She recalled the collective sigh of the community when she'd summoned the authorities. Had she truly transformed into that monster? Rising, Agnes walked to the window, cautiously peeling back the curtain. She watched Billy skateboarding down the street, bathed in the sun's golden farewell, his face illuminated with pure joy. She saw her neighbors, their faces warm and welcoming, cheering him on. A forgotten feeling, something akin to remorse, clenched her heart. Perhaps, she mused, Harmony Glades needed less harmony and a bit more life. Maybe it was time to consider other perspectives, to see past the codified regulations and recognize the people within the community. The people she had sworn to serve.